everyone. Thank you so much for coming out to this community meeting with our guest of honor to this evening. I first want to acknowledge a few guests who are here, members of the City Council, starting by Council President Maria Rivera, Councilman Frank Solano, Councilman Da Silva. Thank you so much for being here, and Councilwoman Jessica Vega. I want to say that, yes, I want to say that this has been an idea ever since I met the mayor of Parkland that I thought it was very important to have here in Central Falls, because we all think that a mass shooting would never happen in a city like Central Falls or in the state of Rhode Island. And when I heard the mayor's story, it really impacted me and alarmed me that this could happen anywhere, and it's important for us to be proactive rather than reactive. So please, everyone, give a Central Falls warm round of applause to Mayor Christine Hunschofsky. And so, to be part of a diverse panel, we have Lorraine Quintero of the Young Voices, and Colonel James Mendonça, Central Falls Police Department. Roberto Rivera, the Coordinator of Safety and School Operations. And our moderator, Channel 12, Carolyn Hagen. Please go ahead. So this is a conversation that we will have. We'll take questions at the end. But I really want to thank the mayor for coming up from Florida and being able to share her experience as mayor with this community that still today is feeling the impact of the Parkland shooting. So, Mayor, I'd like for you to say a few words.
Thank you so much, Mayor. Central Falls, you are very blessed to have such an amazing mayor who really represents your city so well. So the mayor and I met at the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and it's a great organization because it gives all of us an opportunity to learn from one another. Sometimes in our daily lives and in our communities, we get so caught up with what we're doing now that we forget that we're all interconnected and that we can all learn from each other and learn from each other's experiences. Parkland was one of the safest cities in Florida. If it could happen in Parkland, it could happen anywhere. If it could happen at Sandy Hook and in Newtown, it could happen anywhere. And so it's very important that we learn from these events and what happened and what we can do to make our communities safer, our schools safer. And I want to thank the mayor so much for inviting me to come here. He's just amazing. He represents you guys so well. I'm sure he does in your town, but I also know he does on a national level. So you're very well represented, and thank you for having me.
Mic check, got me? Hi everyone, as the mayor had mentioned, my name is Karina Cardona. I'm a reporter and anchor at Channel 12, and I know for us personally over the last year, 14 months, it's been since Parkland, we have been at school safety forums throughout the state of Rhode Island, so it is very special and a great opportunity for us to have Mayor Hunschofsky here tonight to talk to us about her situation in Parkland and really to talk about with members of the panel what we can do here in the state of Rhode Island to improve our school safety measures moving forward. So just to let you guys know, give you a lay of the land what we're doing, we're going to go through this panel right now. We're going to ask them specific questions to each person, and then afterwards we will have an opportunity to open it up to the audience. If any of you have any questions, please feel free to hold them until the end and we will go through them. So just to start, Mayor, you are here. It's been 418 days, I counted, since the shooting in Parkland, Florida. And I think for a lot of us, I know for me personally, I watched the news that day unfold on social media, on the TV, people probably driving home from work, hearing it on the radio, and you listened and watched in horror because it was another school shooting in our country. For you, if you could walk the audience through the events of that day and how you responded to it.
Yeah, so I got a phone call from the city saying that there had been an active shooter call over at Stoneman Douglas. And my first question was, well, do we know that it's a real call? And they weren't sure. I live very close to the high school, and I heard more sirens go by than I had ever heard in my life, and I've lived there almost 19 years. So I decided to drive over to the school, not on the school itself, but in the intersection where there was enough room for the police. They were all set up. And I got there just as parents were arriving. I will never forget the faces of the parents that I saw that day as they were getting texts from their children who were trapped in classrooms. The killer had not been caught yet. No one knew at that time who the killer was, at least on the outside, and how many there were. And the fear, I just don't even know how to describe it. Eventually some students started coming out, and I'll never forget one girl who came out and she had tears rolling down her face, and she literally fell into her mother's arms. And Parkland is a very small community. We're a city of about 31,000 people. Everybody is somehow connected to someone else. We're very family oriented. So everybody knew somebody who was somehow affected with this. As we started hearing the numbers, we weren't sure of the names yet. There was a lot of confusion, communication wasn't the best. And at about 8:30 at night, I, for the first time, looked at my social media, and I saw that they were looking for my friend's daughter. So I texted her, asked her if her daughter was okay. She called me, so when I saw the phone ring, I'm like, oh, she must be fine. But she called me to tell me that her daughter had died. When there was a lot of confusion as to where everybody should be reconnecting with their parents, family members, they ended up bringing everybody to the hotel, the Marriott hotel nearby. And at about 1 in the morning I walked in. Now mind you, this happened around 2:20 in the afternoon. So 1 in the morning, and there were family members who had not heard yet what had happened to their loved ones. And I walked in and I saw parents of a boy who played baseball with my youngest son. I saw a friend who we had just been at a ribbon cutting for a new business earlier in the week. I saw a mom who we had just judged at a debate tournament 2 weeks prior. And I saw another friend of mine. We have a lot of mutual close friends. Our older boys had played soccer together. To see the fear on their faces as a parent, okay, so I'm here as, you know, my job is mayor, but I'm a human being. I'm a mom. This is pretty much my worst fear. And I talk about it like this because when we talk about these kinds of mass shootings and mass murders, because that's what they are, we talk about that day, we talk all about the killer, but we forget how it affects everybody. Again, we are a small, close-knit, family-oriented community. So you see everybody at the local grocery store, on the fields. This affects everybody, and the human toll. There's the loss of life. There are the 17 who were injured. Some of them had some horrible injuries and are still suffering through them. Additionally, the trauma. In the 1200 building where the shootings took place, there were over 400 people in that building. They had to, every one of them had to walk over a dead body to get out. You don't just get over that. You don't just move on from that. Over the time since, there's been anger in the community, completely understandable. With anger and trauma and grief comes division. But we've always been a community where the neighbors helped each other out. We're the community. We had Hurricane Irma in September of 2017, and as soon as people got their electricity back, they're calling me, Christine, where do I go? I want to bring people water, I want to bring them food. So we are that community that likes to help others, and we've really relied on that over the last year as a community to come together.
Speaking of that, in light of what happened, what has changed in the last year? I know you described your community as a resilient one that's trying to bounce back, but on a larger level, has anything changed?
Some things have changed. So when this happened, our Florida legislature was still in session, and they passed the Marjory, Stoneman Public Safety Act, and that was passed within a couple of weeks of the shooting, and it had a lot of changes in it, including more funding for mental health at the schools. They also raised the age to purchase firearms to 21, banned bump stocks, and they allowed for risk protection orders, which give the authorities a tool to be able to take a gun away from someone who is showing that they would be a risk to themselves or someone else. So legislatively, we had some changes very quickly. Some other things feel like they've been slower to change. Right now, we had the 1-year mark not too long ago, and we're very much focusing on the community level, on mental health, and making sure that everyone's taking advantage of all the resources and the treatment that's available for them.
Sticking on the same legislative topic, Mayor Diossa, I know that you just spoke at the State House within the last few weeks or month, advocating for we need more change here in the state of Rhode Island. Last year, Governor Gina Raimondo signed 2 bills into law. There was the bump stock ban, there was the red flag bill. In your opinion, though, do you believe our legislators on Smith Hill need to do more this year in order to ensure further school safety?
So I think that, again, it's important that our legislators are informed about the meaning of these 3 legislations that are in front of them, such as the banning the assault-style weapons, the prohibit the high capacity, and ban guns on school grounds. I think that even though those 3 measures are important, I think that something that I learned from the mayor in her visit here is school committees need to do more about having these conversations more frequently, looking at our school safety plans and practicing them. I know that when the Parkland shooting happened, we had an emergency meeting in my office with all the school leaders here in Central Falls, and with the leadership of our colonel, we decided to do school walkthroughs of the buildings to make sure that there weren't any deficiencies, and if there were, we would correct them, and making sure that each school had a school safety plan where we can practice and be assured that if this was ever to happen, we at least have some preparedness for our police officers and any first responders who have to respond, and also the teachers who would have to step up in case this was to happen. So you're right. These 3 legislations that are in front of the State House this month, I think are important to keep being proactive, but as at the municipal level where we have to do the work, so it's important that we're having these conversations.
I think in light of any school shooting, we all see on the news, it was after Sandy Hook, it was after Parkland, there are solutions that are proposed within communities, whether it be gun control, more mental health awareness, more school resource officers. So I want to ask each of you on the panel, I want to start with you, Roberto, and just kind of work our way down. Of those 3 things, gun control, mental health awareness, and more school resource officers, which, in your opinion, is possibly the most important? If you can't answer which is the most important, what do you believe is the solution between all 3 of them? What is the answer?
Well, I think in my opinion, the mental health piece and the school SRO, I think they play hand in hand. You know, I mean, we've been very fortunate to build our SRO program here at the high school and at the middle school. And I feel like, you know, the relationships that the SROs are able to build with our students is very important. It helps us to get to the root of issues that could potentially be big issues down the road. In my opinion, I believe that the mental health piece is definitely one of the keys to get into the root of, a major incident from even happening. But the SRO piece, it plays a big part. Not in the sense that, they have guns. It's not that. I mean, in my opinion, it's the relationship. It's the relationship piece that we've been able to build with our SRO program and our students. That plays hand in hand with the mental health piece.
Colonel?
I don't believe there's a panacea in solving this problem. I think it's a collective effort on many people's part. I think mental health plays into the problem significantly. I think you have to have people that, not everybody can be a mental health expert. Certainly our police officers not, but we do receive some training and the basics of diagnosing it so we can work to resolve issues before they get out of hand. I think with the SROs is important because they build a relationship with the students. The students will know about something occurring long before anybody else will. And if they trust any police officer to come to them ahead of time in advance before an incident happens, we can work to resolve it before it becomes catastrophic. So I think it's important. It's important for us to follow social media. I think I don't want to preempt the question you're going to ask me. I think about an incident that currently haven't here, so I'll wait for you to ask it later. But certain things like that, by us following what's going on, we can intervene before a problem exists. Sometimes it might not even be in our own community. It might be another community. We might find the information and pass it on to them and assist them with the issue as well. So I think mental health is the biggest concern for me. I think trying to find ways of identifying it and intervening before something occurs that's, so we're not responding to an incident where we're preempting it. We can be proactive in dealing with it.
Lorraine?
I think that all of the things that you mentioned are extremely important pertaining to this certain issue. But for me, I feel that out of all of them, that the most important is gun control. I feel that there shouldn't be the ability for somebody to bring a gun onto a school campus and hurt a bunch of student and staff. It's unsettling to know that this has happened to people. It kind of puts fear in some of us. But I do think that all pieces are very important, especially like they were saying, the mental health piece I think is extremely important as well. That's my take on it.
Mayor Diossa?
Yeah, I think all three are extremely important, and Central Falls is very lucky to have an office that's just focused on health, that's led by Dr. Michael Fine, and his proactiveness of creating information on mental health has not only informed me and educated me, but made it a big matter for us to be having these conversations with not only law enforcement, but our school district, to be aware of any mental issue. I think, as Lorraine said, it's a great point that there's no reason why, other than law enforcement, anyone should walk into a school carrying a gun, even if it's concealed. I think that right there can allow Lorraine to be able to go to school and learn and not have to worry about having a gun in her school. And then the second one is, the third one I should say is, we've seen great benefits of having school resource officers in our schools. Like Roberto said, beyond the safety component of it, I think the development of relationships with our students is the one that I most cherish, especially when the students are able to interact and trust our police officers and call each other on a first name basis. To me, that's what's going to help create a lot of awareness and proactiveness if any situation were to come about.
To follow along with much of what was said, I mean, we need to all be paying attention. If somebody's making a threat on social media, that needs to get reported, and then to see something, say something, the people who receive it need to do something. I'm only a little concerned when we keep talking about mental health because, that tends to be a little stigmatizing. Sometimes people kill other people just because they're really angry and they don't know how to channel their anger. And while we may think that that's a mental health problem, they just maybe have an anger issue. So I just like to be very careful that we don't add to that stigma. But really, in most of these cases, no one was surprised in the aftermath. There were signs there, so it's important as parents that we pay attention. It's important that students pay attention. School resource officers, guidance counselors who are given the opportunity to do their job and be actual guidance counselors, teachers who are given the opportunity to actually do their job and be present with their students. They're going to be your best bet at identifying if somebody's struggling, because there can be times when people are struggling and all they need is some extra help and some extra support.
The chief had alluded to this earlier, but there was an incident in Central Falls back in January where a student had made threats online. Chief, if you could speak to that too, and Roberto, if you would like to as well. What was that incident? How did you pinpoint it, and how exactly did you address it?
It was on actually January 22nd, 2019. We received information from the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force via a National Threat Operations Center regarding a school shooting threat. And from working with the FBI and with school officials, we narrowed it down to the threat was going to be on Central Falls High School, and we determined who the student was. There was actually a conspiracy between that student and another student who since moved out of state and was living in Connecticut. The threat was to bring an AK-47 assault rifle on the school grounds and do harm. The following day, the student was in the school. We went to the house, arrested the individual without incident, and the subject has since been charged. But the laws at the time, unfortunately, didn't have the threat of a weapon other than an explosive device as a felony. So it was just a misdemeanor because it was a threat. The student is undergoing mental health counseling now, no longer a student here. However, that type of threat should obviously come with a greater penalty. There is legislation in place right now. It's at the House being held to further study, changing where in addition to threats with an explosive device, any type of weapon on any public building institution would come with the penalty of a felony too. So that was rectified early on and no one was harmed. The individual in question didn't have access to weapons, but we didn't know that at the time. So we took the threat very seriously, worked together collectively, and was able to intervene before anybody could have potentially been hurt, because we didn't know if he or the other person involved had weapons. They quite possibly could have. It was an empty threat in this situation, but in other situations it may not. So luckily for us, somebody alerted the authorities. We took very quick, decisive action in it, and I applaud the FBI's involvement with this, our detectives, and the school administration working together very, very quickly to put an end to this resolution.
What is the school's role in that type of situation? How do you guys handle it?
Well, I remember I woke up in the morning and I saw a text message alluding to a potential threat. I mean, I'm gonna be honest, it's one of the most scariest text messages that you can get. I mean, I have a student that comes to the high school. I have a student that goes to the middle school. So this literally hit home, right? And I remember walking into work, I didn't change anything. You know, I kissed my girls goodbye, told them, I want you girls to be safe. And I let them come to school. You know, walking here, I can see that there was active patrol all around the school, outside, and the staff were asking me, what's going on? You know, and the last thing I wanted to do was cause panic, because we didn't really understand. We didn't really have too much information just yet. We heard that it was a potential threat, but we were still waiting to be debriefed from the detective who was still being debriefed by the FBI. So what do you do in that situation? You know, so I try to be honest with people, tell them that, there's something going on right now in the community. I don't want to cause panic. But that morning, honestly, it's like the world slowed down and everyone looked like a suspect in that situation. And it was very tense. But when we got the detective, he came down, he was able to show us some evidence, and I'm gonna tell you, like, we would have been able to narrow that timeline as fast as we did if we didn't have the relationship with the kids. Because it was something social media from somebody else's social media. And we were able to identify some of the players that were around that source, and then we were able to literally, like in 10 minutes, identify who the potential student was. And then I was able to breathe a little bit when I learned that that student wasn't even in the school that morning. You know, and then honestly, it was like maybe within 12 minutes they had the student in custody, which was impressive, off-site. But for our protocol, I mean, it's our job to maintain, obviously, #1, safety, not to cause panic, and to go through our protocol the way it's designed, you know, step by step, until we can neutralize whatever is a threat.
God forbid that situation had escalated and it turned into an active shooter situation. Chief, since the shooting in Parkland, has anything changed with the active shooter protocol here in Central Falls? And I see a lot of kids out here tonight who are, I assume, Central Falls students. What should they be doing if this were to happen here?
Within the state of Rhode Island, there's actually a requirement to submit all hazard safety plans to the statewide safety commission. Actually, it was a government-appointed commission I sat on for about 1.5 years myself, maybe about a year back. I don't know if all schools are doing what they need to be doing, but I can tell you here in Central Falls we are. Every school has someone assigned to it that puts the plans together. We review them and they're submitted to the state. Also, in addition, I think the mayor touched upon it, that we went as a group with the school department. Police officers went to every single school and did basically an evaluation, a threat assessment, to see what some of the weaknesses were and do the best we can to try to correct them. Some of it was simple, some of it was been costly, and we had to apply for some grants money, which we did. The school department applied for some grant funding. We're applying for additional funding for school safety as well. On top of that, we're currently dealing with right now with the cops hiring grant to try to facilitate corrective action for some of the things that we found. We are required, we follow best practices because we're both state and nationally accredited, so we're required to update our policies annually, and we're required to do some type of active shooter training, whether it be classroom or some type of tabletop or actual live exercise, which we conducted last year at Calcutt Middle School during the break. We got some grant funding this year where we did a tabletop exercise, and we plan on doing a live exercise at the learning community in Central Falls with some of our partners. So we're very serious about this, and we work collectively with the school department as a partnership to get these things done. And last time we did it with Calcutt, we asked if some of the faculty could actually be there to see it unfold, see how dynamic it really is. And it was an eye-opener for them, seeing how things unravel. We had staff members there and teachers involved in the process. And we learned a few things. Everything wasn't done perfectly, but we learned from the mistakes and make sure we don't make those mistakes again. And we got to remember too, under stress, it's going to be even more difficult and it's going to be even more dynamic. But to the end is try to make the schools as safe as possible for the faculty and to the students. But all the security in the world is not going to be enough. A lot of it is going to be built on the relationship and be able to diagnose certain issues and threats before they happen, so we're not just destined just to respond to them. So to answer the question, we do everything that's required of us and then some to really try to make the schools in Central Falls as safe as possible.
Lorraine, turning to you, I asked both mayors this afternoon, growing up, did you ever feel unsafe when you went to school? And both of them at the same time said, no. Personally, I always felt safe at school. That was one of the safest places you could be in a community. Do you feel safe when you go to school every day?
I think that to an extent, I do feel safe, but at the same time, there's always that thought in the back of my mind, like, what if I don't go home to my mom today? And that's really scary. And for me, because I have younger siblings, I have a niece, I have a little sister, it's really frightening to know that these situations have happened. And it could be anybody, it could be any school. And I think that I definitely do have that fear, like leaving my house to go to school and saying goodbye to my sisters and my mom in the morning. I don't know what could happen.
I had a conversation with a student in Cranston last year following the shooting in Parkland, and they said, we don't want more school resource officers, we want more money put toward guidance counselors. So our peers, if they need to, can go and talk to someone. What is more important to you? Having a school resource officer at the front door greeting you every day, or having a guidance counselor there if you have a problem that you can go talk to?
I feel that both are so important. I know that for my school, we have a really good relationship with our SRO officer. He's very kind. We're on a first name basis with him. A lot of us interact with him, but I also think that it is really important to have guidance counselors available to students if they ever need to speak with them. If they feel that there's something going on that they need to talk about, I feel like both of them are so, just really important for them to have available to them.
Clairdo, talking about mental health awareness, what resources are there in the Central Falls School District for any student who might need to speak with someone?
So right now we have a partnership with RIC where we have social work interns at the high school and the middle school, which has been really great. The program is growing. We also have social workers, school psychologists here at the school, your counseling. So there's a platform of resources available to kids, but I'm going to be the first one to admit that this is an area that we're struggling in, and it's something that we're working as a district to address and become better at it. And it is becoming stronger. But I think we need to find a way to promote it more, to bring more awareness to what's out there for students and families. Just recently we had a parent engagement event, which was really great, and we were able to make the connections with families, and I think it starts there. Families engaging parents and students, building that relationship so that students feel comfortable to open up when situations do arise, having that trust in place. I think that's huge. And it's something that we're tapping into right now and I'm excited about. And I can't wait to see it grow more than what it is.
A commission earlier this year that was investigating the Parkland shooting released its findings, and one of the findings that it released said that the state of Florida should allow teachers who are properly trained and go through background checks to be able to carry firearms on school grounds. Mayor, we talked about this earlier today, but can you once again reiterate your thoughts for the audience on that?
Yeah, so I watched the MSD commission meeting where that recommendation was made, and I'd just like to clarify for everybody, there was no expert testimony given on that topic. That just came up as part of the commission's discussions. Personally, I think security should be in charge of security, and I think teachers should be in charge of teaching. That as a mom, I say that as somebody who probably doesn't have the patience to be a teacher, but schools are also supposed to be a place for education. And when I say education, I don't mean doing well on a test. I mean learning and learning to love learning. And I just think if any school or any state believes that there needs to be more security in the school, then they need to pay for it in the form of professionally trained security. I don't want the police teaching my children English, no offense to any of the police. But I think the experts in an area should be the experts in an area. When your job is security, you're looking at the school differently. You're looking at the people coming in and out differently. When your job is teaching, you have a different mindset in the classroom than if you're supposed to be the one guarding the students. So that's just my personal opinion on that. If I could go back to some of the things that were said before about safety plans and all those things. Plans are great. Processes, procedures are great. But if they are not implemented and followed with fidelity, they don't mean anything. You can have all the policies in the world, but people need to be trained, and people need to know what those policies are and what's expected of them.
I was going to flow into my next question for you, which is for any community in this country that might unfortunately have to deal with this at some point, what is your piece of advice? And what is your piece of advice to Central Falls as city leaders, law enforcement, school officials try to work through the issue of school safety on a daily basis?
For any community, and unfortunately there have been several communities that this has happened to since Parkland. Santa Fe, Texas happened May 18th after ours, and I had reached out to their mayor who had just been elected and wasn't even sworn in yet. And my heart goes out to any community that has to go through this because I know what they will be going through, and it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. Communication is key. When agencies and governmental organizations stay in their own silos and don't coordinate with one another, don't have a communications plan. For example, one of the things after Stoneman Douglas is no one knew where they were supposed to go to find their children. Where were they all supposed to go meet? That wasn't communicated to anybody, and how would that word get out? People were texting, calling each other, so there does need to be a plan in place. But I think the number one thing, one of the things that's happened since the tragedy in Parkland was that we force now a lot of these groups to come together and sit at a table and talk to each other. The mental health professionals, state leaders, county leaders. In Florida, the schools are run by the county. So it's important that everybody that has any influence on this has a seat at the table and listens to one another to learn the best way everybody can work together to keep everyone safe.
I want to open this up to audience questions, but before that, is there anything that anyone else on the panel would like to remark on?
I'd like to speak briefly on arming teachers or having weapons and firearms in schools in general. I actually recently testified on a House bill, possession of firearms in school grounds. And I think what that bill differs really is really not necessarily about the gun itself, is the person behind the gun and who's qualified to carry it. And I strongly feel that no one other than a police officer, whether it be active, retired, or off-duty, should be, if they have the proper firearms permitting, they should carry a firearm on school grounds. It's evident from recent attacks in most school shooters pay little attention, mind to whether or not they survived the attacks. So someone else on school grounds, whether it be anybody, a permit holder or a teacher or a janitor, has that firearm, is not going to know how to deal with that type of situation. And when the police respond, it's going to be very fluid, it's going to be very dynamic, and we're not going to know the difference between what we perceive to be the threat and what the real threat would be. And any hesitation on our part could lead to more lives being lost. So I think anyone that's involved in that situation as a firearm, other than a police officer responding to the active shooter scenario, hopefully it never happens, but if it did, is going to be, it's really going to be a more of a liability than anything else when we respond.
I also want to say thank you to the moms that are in action who are here today, and Young Voices, because they keep everyone on their feet on this issue, and their advocacy definitely has paid off at the State House, and I want to give them all a round of applause for being here today.
And if anybody thinks, you know, this happens far away and it doesn't affect you, my friend Laura's here from Parkland area, and she just moved up to Rhode Island, so she knows what it's like. She was close friends with, she's close friends with one of the families who lost their daughter. And we were just at, what was the best hamburger?
So I took her to Stanley's.
Stanley's.
So I told her that they sell really good burgers, but she went with the lobster.
No. They said the lobster roll was the special. Everybody else at the table ordered it, so I couldn't be the only one with the burger. But the waitress there came over to me, and her grandson went to Stoneman Douglas, and he just wasn't there that day. So people do really need to realize that this can affect anyone, and it doesn't just affect those 17 families and the 17 injured. The ripple effects are enormous. And I think if we realize that and take that to heart, we can do the things we need to do to keep everybody safe.
Real quick, did we mention your tie to New England?
I don't think so.
She's a Boston native, so she didn't grow up far from here. So this is kind of coming home.
I went to Boston Latin School, and then to BU, and then to Babson.
No one knew we had a tie up here. Great. Any members of the audience have any questions? I know we covered a lot, but anyone who has them, raise your hands really high, and we'll pass the microphone around.
So my name is Xavier Copeland. I'm part of March for Our Lives Rhode Island and Young Voices. My question for
Get as close to your mouth.
My question for you guys on the panel is, what is your opinion on student activism, and after Parkland, how they started March for Our Lives? How would you say that student activism and student opinions on this issue have been ever since then?
I think student activism is great. I think grown-up activism is great. One of the things that I enjoyed most seeing, so I knew several of these students before they became the students, and what they did so beautifully is bring a lot of inspiration, even to a lot of grown-ups who, when they were younger, were the activists, but maybe kind of forgot that part of themselves. And it was amazing to see such additional community involvement and engagement. People started paying attention to a lot more things, and I think the students are just amazing, but I might be biased.
Yeah, I think there's a special voice that comes from youth activism. I think that your perspective on this issue matters because you actually have come to school, and so there's a reality from the mayor who is speaking broadly about the impact of these issues, but you have to go to school every single day worried or concerned of what could happen. So absolutely, I support young activism, and your voice is incredibly important to this issue.
I'm a firm believer that the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and the louder you speak, eventually somebody's going to listen. So without, your voice is important, your students here, I mean, you go to school here, you have a say on some of the policies that take place within the school. I believe they do have a voice. I believe you should express yourself.
When I'm working here, a lot of kids ask me, "Hey, mister, do you have kids?" And I joke around, I say, "Yeah, I have 750 kids." But the truth is, believe it or not, you guys are like my family. And when I come to work, I'm here to provide the best safe environment, that's conducive for learning for you. And I think we have to work together to make that happen. So I'm all for student voice. I'm all for all of us working together to make things better.
Any other questions?
Yes, State Representative James McLaughlin, District 7. Mayor, I'd like to thank you for being here tonight. And basically, I had areas of concern in reference to what was brought up, response time, on the actual shooting. How did you feel about that?
The response time? Well, there was a police officer on campus. So the response time should have been quicker than any imaginable response time. And in my opinion, he didn't respond the way he should have.
that in itself was a tragedy. And my second question basically is, it was mentioned, you know, how does your state legislature feel about taking a certain percentage of school funding, which I put in a bill for, basically towards security?
Yeah, so there was money put aside for the Guardian program to add additional security personnel at the schools. They also added funding for mental health, and they've also added some funding for some hardening. Funding is always, though, never enough.
Thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Garcia, and I'm part of the CIP of Young Voices. And one of my questions were that it was the mayor from Florida. You said that the teachers and students and other staff are part of the school should recognize like another student in like odd behavior kind of thing. But like as a student like myself, like how am I supposed to like know what to recognize in a student that can be like you know? And
that's a great question. How should any of us know? I think we need to have a lot more education on these things. I think we need to talk more about these things. But one thing students can do is if you see something on social media, as was the case here, let a trusted adult know what you saw and report it. And that's one of the first things you can do. But there definitely needs to be overall in our society as a whole, a lot more of the discussion of what to look for signs of depression or all sorts of things.
I can assure you the police department is never going to fault anybody for letting us know about information. If it comes out to be false or hoax, then so be it. But let us make that determining factor. If you don't want to contact the police, that's fine. Faculty member, your parents, anyone. And we can look into it and determine how viable a threat it is. We came across another incident maybe about 4 months prior to this one we had at the high school. It was a threat against a school, and we assumed at the time it was Central Falls. We immediately, somebody got some phone calls. I called the superintendent. It might have been around 10, 11 o'clock at night. And we checked the records to see if that student was actually a student here, and it wasn't. And we did a little more research, and it came back to a high school in Paterson, New Jersey. So we contacted the authorities there, and I don't know what happened from that point in time. It had nothing to do with Central Falls or any school in Rhode Island, but we didn't know that at the time. But the information we had, we forwarded to Paterson, and they had information they could follow up on. So anything that comes across social media at all that raises an eyebrow, just call somebody you trust, you have confidence in, that information will eventually come to the police.
We also have a reporting app that you can now use that was part of, I think it's Fortify Florida, that's part of the MSD Public Safety Act. So making sure that people know who to contact is also very important. That's part of that, you know, letting everybody share information, know who to go to, who's best to contact. And if I could just add on also, as part of the Marjory Stoneman Douglas Public Safety Act, our state legislature made it a second-degree felony to have a threat, to make a threat on social media for any kind of shooting.
Any other questions?
Hello. That was a bit loud, sorry about that. Mayor Christine, I'm not going to get your last name right.
Hunschofsky.
I wouldn't have. And Mayor Diossa, I'm so happy that you're both on a stage partnering from communities with very different demographics. I've lived in very suburban places, and I've lived in very urban places. And a strange fact about my life is that 5 people in my life are now gone because of gun violence. And I'm a very normal looking guy, and I'm a very normal guy, so I don't look for these things. Gun violence has cut across all demographics, and we don't often hear about that. The reason that we're here tonight is to hear about a specific kind of violence that's about school shootings, but we know that it just affects so many people, demographics, and places. As everybody up on the stage is speaking about trying to grapple with these issues, we're not allowed to study it with federal dollars. And that was made illegal through the Dickey Amendment. When I have 5 people that are gone from my life because of gun violence, that is a public health issue. But we can't call it that. And we can't study it in the same way we study automobile accidents, or cancer, or diabetes, or other things that have taken people out of my life. But no one of those things has taken 5 people out of my life. And I know that with your roles as mayors and law enforcement and young people, that we don't have the power to try to turn that over. But I don't hear enough about that. And I wish that were more part of the conversation. So I guess, how do we amplify that? Because it just seems so challenging to me that we can't have some of those minds working on this too when we're working in our own communities towards these issues.
Well, I'm familiar with what you're talking about because I've been listening to the student activists. This has been one of the things that they've talked about. I believe Moms Demand Action has also been speaking on this item. Yeah, it's something, you know, how do you solve a problem if you don't have the data and the analysis to solve it? I don't know any business that operates that way. I don't know any organization that functions that operates that way. So you're absolutely right, sir. It should definitely be something that should be studied.
Yeah, and I think, to your other point, I think the medical community needs to be engaged a little more. I know that some have been very vocal about the issue, but I think here in Rhode Island, I think that we have to engage them so that they understand, or as they witness when they have a victim of gun violence in the emergency room or a patient, that this is serious and their voice is needed so that people understand the impact this has on all communities here in Rhode Island.
One last question from the youth.
Madam Mayor, I have a question for you. My name is Jay Shell, and I'm a member and organizer of March for Our Lives Rhode Island, the Coalition Against Gun Violence, and also Young Voices. And I would like to think that the survivors of Parkland and the founders of the National March for Our Lives done substantial work within their communities in order to make change. How did that partnership between the government and those youth work? Because I feel like that was a partnership that Rhode Island could really learn from. I'm sorry. Go again.
Keep the microphone close.
Okay.
We're in 50s.
So I would like to think that the founders and survivors of Parkland made a substantial change in their communities. So how did that partnership work between you and those youth? And how do you think that could translate into Rhode Island?
Well, I think one of the best things that has happened is that it's not just the same 5 kids. People throughout the country have been working on all different levels of government. You know, there's certain things you can do on a local level, there's certain things you can do on a county level, there's certain things you can do on a state level, and there are certain things you can do on a national level. So it's important that you have different groups working, figuring out what their priorities are and working on those different levels. There's certain things, so in Florida, the state legislature has preempted local governments from doing a lot on a lot of things. So when we want things to change, we have to go up to Tallahassee and make changes on a state level. The March for Our Lives kids have done a great job bringing a lot of national attention to it. One thing I would encourage any groups and any activists and anybody wanting to make change is to listen as well. Developing relationships and working with those in office, whether you agree or disagree, is very important. You should bring attention to whatever is important to you, but make sure that you're also working to develop relationships with these people so that you can have a seat at the table, so that they want to listen to you because you're bringing them really good research and information that you have. Did I answer your question?
I also want to thank the Rhode Island Coalition Against Gun Violence for being a co-sponsor of this event and for coming out today. Thank you.
And if we could continue the round of applause for our panel tonight. Thank you guys all for coming out and taking part, and that's it.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.